This is madness, and it has to do with Donald Trump and Michael Saylor. Because directly from Michael Saylor's villa in Miami, there are exciting news. There was the Bitcoin $100,000 per Bitcoin party. And Dennis Porter published something there, or rather, said something very strange, which I had already mentioned here a few days ago. It's about how the USA is developing a new strategy to buy Bitcoin. Particularly exciting about the whole thing, there are rumors that the USA might convert their 200,000 Bitcoin into a strategic reserve. Could convert? And why is this so important now? Just imagine, if these Bitcoins were sold, it would throw the entire market into chaos. And it's not about whether this happens directly now, but just the news that it could happen in the future is extremely important. If Donald Trump becomes president, the likelihood is currently very high that the USA will convert their 200,000 Bitcoin into a strategic Bitcoin reserve and perhaps immediately buy more Bitcoin. Additionally, it could be that some US states officially adopt Bitcoin, or rather, include Bitcoin in their own strategic reserve. Texas would be a strong candidate for this, for example, Ohio or Pennsylvania. It is quite realistic that Texas, Pennsylvania, or Ohio could be one of the first states in the USA to use Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, and now it gets exciting because Dennis Porter has presented an interesting idea, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, ESF. This could offer a new way for the USA to accumulate Bitcoin. The classic method would be to simply buy Bitcoin through official exchanges or brokers, as Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy does, for example, again and again. But that might be legally difficult to implement, and this is where the ESF comes into play. Because the USA could issue loans through the ESF, for example, to other countries. And a condition in the loan agreement could then be that the repayment must be made exclusively in Bitcoin. This way, for example, it would passively flow Bitcoin into the strategic reserve of the ESF and naturally into the strategic reserve of the USA without significantly affecting the market price. The intriguing part is that this could probably happen discreetly without the public finding out. This is usually only discovered at the end because large buyers on the open market often drive the price up significantly. And this method, on the other hand, would be a kind of smart OTC over-the-counter deal that burdens the market less and strategically accumulates Bitcoin in the long term. And Dennis Porter is an American Bitcoin advocate and political strategist. He is the co-founder and CEO of the Satoshi Action Fund, a non-profit organization that focuses on educating policymakers about the benefits of Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin itself, and to promote corresponding legislation. And he is involved almost everywhere. Porter is also actively advocating for the introduction of Bitcoin reserves at the state and national levels in the USA. And we must know, under his leadership, several US states have considered laws or passed laws that provide for the creation of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Additionally, Dennis Porter has collaborated with politicians at the federal level, or is working with them to advance the idea of a national Bitcoin reserve. And his efforts have helped raise awareness of Bitcoin in political circles and promote corresponding initiatives. And Dennis Porter was recently interviewed at the Michael Saylor $100,000 Bitcoin party. And this is what he said there. Dennis Porter mentions that there could be more creative ways to indirectly accumulate Bitcoin. Of course, I'm not an expert in US law, but his approaches are truly exciting. For example, he said that the Exchange Stabilization Fund, ESF, is an emergency reserve of the US Treasury, which was introduced in 1934. The goal of the fund is to promote the stability of financial markets, particularly through intervention in the foreign exchange markets. And so the ESF can buy or sell foreign currencies. But now comes the interesting point. Can the ESF hold Bitcoin or even buy Bitcoin? That is not possible except for one exception. If the US government, for example, were to adjust the regulations through an executive order, that could change. A presidential decision could allow the ESF, as I have mentioned in other videos, to hold Bitcoin. This means, theoretically, a government could use instruments like the Exchange Stabilization Fund, ESF, to allocate funds for certain measures without legal adjustments if deemed necessary to promote market stability. We might see this during Donald Trump's presidency this year, especially considering how the market is currently developing, and we might even be heading towards a crash. The ESF has certain freedoms, especially in emergency measures, to respond to market crises. However, Bitcoin is currently not included as part of the mandate, as the focus is on traditional currencies and stability. And one way Donald Trump could buy Bitcoin would be through the use of an executive order. Possible, and such orders could temporarily bypass or adjust existing regulations. Attention, this is important now as long as they are within the scope of presidential powers. So it is conceivable, as I have mentioned several times in other videos, that a pro-Bitcoin government could use such an order to instruct the ESF to acquire Bitcoin without the need for a formal law to be passed. And in one of the last videos, I mentioned that Trump could do that, to perhaps invest $10 billion in Bitcoin upfront, thereby securing Bitcoin. What do you think will happen if that happens? That would be phenomenal and would mean for us that the crypto market would skyrocket, that prices would soar, and that we need to prepare now. If you want to build financial freedom through crypto, want to learn Bitcoin, then click on the link in the description below the video now. Watch the video. It is free and only available for a short time. It is important that you take action. Such a sum would be sufficient to trigger a significant market movement. And of course, that the USA could secure a significant amount of Bitcoin, and at the same time, could massively increase the USA's Bitcoin holdings. And for a government, this could be a strategic move to gain an advantage in the global race for digital assets, for Bitcoin. And the discussion about whether the USA will massively invest in Bitcoin in the near future remains, of course, exciting. There are various opinions and, of course, scenarios that are currently being debated. Some speculate that the US government could buy large amounts of Bitcoin, maybe even already buying in the background, and then just present us with a fait accompli. There is talk of 1 million or even 4 million Bitcoin, while others consider this unlikely, or even believe that individual states like Texas, Pennsylvania, or Ohio might take the lead with a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And here the focus is less on pushing Bitcoin or the Bitcoin price, but rather on strengthening the US dollar. Just take a look at where all the companies that are buying the most Bitcoin are currently located. A very, very large number of these companies are located in the USA. In the USA, for example, Bitcoin mining companies, financial institutions like BlackRock and Fidelity, or even MicroStrategy. Bitcoin is unlikely to replace the US dollar, but rather help to strengthen it. In this context, Bitcoin could serve as a tool, but the main goal remains the securing and stabilization of the dollar as a global reserve currency. There are initiatives like the Department of Government Efficiency, which, together with influential players, possibly including Elon Musk, are working on strengthening the dollar. Working in the background, and some voices like Dennis Porter are even convinced that there will soon be large-scale Bitcoin purchases. However, there are also skeptical views on this matter which assume that potential purchases will occur on a more moderate scale, perhaps even only through the conversion of the existing 200,000 Bitcoin that the US already owns. It is also emphasized that a direct purchase of Bitcoin on a large scale, for example through exchanges like Coinbase, which are associated with BlackRock, is unlikely. Instead, over-the-counter, OTC markets, special Bitcoin facilities, or other creative methods could be used to build up Bitcoin holdings. What we are seeing right now, however, is that there are crazy news stories every day in relation to cryptocurrencies, in relation to Bitcoin, predicting prices, Bitcoin purchases by countries and companies, states and federal states in the USA that are building or want to build Bitcoin reserves. Want to build. It just doesn't stop, and this happens daily. And if you missed the last videos, you should know that an incredible amount is happening. The fact is, there is less and less Bitcoin. You may have already heard this from me. I say this quite often, but it is important. Millions of Bitcoin are lost forever, and large companies like MicroStrategy, BlackRock, and so on are buying up Bitcoin in bulk. This makes it increasingly difficult for ordinary people to own Bitcoin themselves. As early as 2016, there was a billionaire who invited Bitcoin developers to a private party on his island. Why would someone do that? Back then, many said Bitcoin could never reach $30,000 per Bitcoin. Now we're talking about $1 million per Bitcoin, and that no longer sounds so unrealistic. And what really concerns me is that with the Bitcoin that companies like BlackRock are buying, it becomes more difficult for us ordinary people to even own 1 million Satoshis. And if you have that, you are far ahead of billions of other people, and that's important to know. As a reminder, only 450 new Bitcoins are generated per day, but these 450 coins do not all end up on the market. Many Bitcoin miners keep their coins or sell them directly to banks or to companies like BlackRock. And in the summer of 2024, it became known that large banks had asked Bitcoin miners to sell their Bitcoin directly to them. But the fact is, Bitcoin miners often want to keep their coins themselves, so maybe only 50 to 100 Bitcoins actually make it to the market daily. And the Bitcoin ETFs exacerbate the situation much more. They accumulate multiples of the amount that is actually produced every day. And now, in addition to that, MicroStrategy by Michael Saylor. They recently acquired 2,550 more Bitcoins. Before that, it was 5,500, and in total, they now own over 423,000 Bitcoins. And MicroStrategy's strategy is clear. They want to have more Bitcoin than the USA. So their goal is to own 1 million Bitcoins, and they are almost halfway there. And by the end of 2025 or at the latest 2026, this goal could probably be achieved. And with that, they would have more Bitcoin than Satoshi Nakamoto himself. And by the way, Michael Saylor personally owns over 100,000 Bitcoin. And if at some point, countries like the USA, Panama, or other nations start buying Bitcoin on a large scale, there will be no whole coins left. There will be no coins left for individual investors. The extreme scarcity will drive the price to astronomical heights. And Michael Saylor expects that in the next 10 to 15 years, it could rise to $13 million per Bitcoin. And what does that mean for you now? The scarcity of Bitcoin is real. We live in a world where there is always an abundance of goods. But with Bitcoin, it's different. When the coins are gone, they are gone. And if a company like MicroStrategy or BlackRock owns 1 million Bitcoin, there won't be much left for the rest of the world. That means for us, we need to act now. We need to wake up. And if you want to build financial freedom through crypto, want to know which cryptocurrencies I invest in, want to learn about Bitcoin, want to learn about crypto, then click on the link in the description below the video now. It's important that you take action and recognize the signs of what's happening right now.